So, hi everybody. My name is Eduardo. I'm gonna quickly move into my presentation slide. I'm Eduardo. People call me Ed. I ask people to call me Ed. I call myself an indie dev. I do want to say that I'm a very junior indie dev. I have one game released on Steam with a couple of friends who are here watching this talk, and I'm very proud that they're here. I've also worked on several projects, most of which I've never seen released, but I've helped prototype several of them. I worked mostly as a gameplay developer, but that has led me to develop my skills as a tools developer, which is more or less what I'm going to be talking about today, mostly what I'm going to talk about today. Before I started in indie dev, I worked in software development for 6 or 7 years, so that gave me the foundation I needed to understand how to approach code in such a way that I can make and build reusable tools, and I'm going to try to combine that past into how I approach giving you the insight that I'm going to talk about. I am also Peruvian. I'm very proud to be Peruvian. It is very, very warm right here right now, and I am envious and jealous of the winter you guys are having right now. I'm also, as Noah mentioned, a recent RIT grad. I graduated last year. My capstone project was a project called Vessel, which I will be talking about briefly here because I want to talk about some of the tools that we built for that, specifically some of the tools that our tools dev brand of Rajneesh built. And I'm also a big time nerd, as not only the picture, but just me in general will help highlight. My blue sky is there if anybody wants to add me. I mostly post nonsense. It's fair warning. But yeah, I'm also going to be posting stuff I do about my game projects there and whatever updates and whips I have. So onto the tool itself. Onto the talk itself. I want to lay some groundwork so we all start from more or less the same place. And as we move forward, we talk in the same language and understand, right? So what is a tool? It's important to cover the basics first before we move forward, but it's in analyzing these very broad terms that we can start honing down on what things are. And any software that aids you in developing your game, you could consider a tool. So if you're using Notepad to write your idea so that that's your checklist, then technically Notepad is a tool, right? But there are, of course, tools that are much more in-depth and much more specific and much more domain-oriented than just Notepad, right? There are tools that exist for every facet of game development in the sense that you have tools for production, you have tools for art and aesthetics, you have tools for music production, you have tools for coding and development, you have tools for game design. In fact, there are even tools to port stuff from physical prototypes into the digital space to help translate some of your ideas from the physical space into the digital space, right? It's important to remember that tools evolve and grow over time because usually the problems that they solve also grow and evolve over time. A lot of the problems that are related to game development are related to the context of the technology that the game is being developed under. So as that context changes and evolves and matures, so do the tools that surround the discipline. So if you get into tools development, you should expect your tools to not be one and done or static, right? They're going to change. And also something to remember is tools define workflows, right? If you don't have any tools, you're going to work a particular way. But as you begin to add tools to your particular way of working, that workflow is going to change and adapt and respond to the tools that you're bringing in. Slowly over time, those tools might even dictate how you approach that workflow. So when you're talking about tools development, perhaps something that needs to be asked is how much needs to go into a tool, right? At what horizon do you call a tool to have been developed or complete even? And that ultimately, I guess, depends on the needs, the projects, and the tool itself. There are tools in many different sizes and many different scopes and many different levels of depth. And knowing the target you're shooting for as you're developing tools or as you're looking for a tool to bring into your workflow, it's important to understand that the bigger and more complete the tool is, the more it will define your workflow, right? I have some examples listed here of what tools can be. You have big tools. You can have the entire game engine or your audio editor. That's a very complex and large tool that contains many tools within it. You have more of a medium-sized tool, which might be an ability editor or a dialogue organizer, where that is integrating or it's helping surface an entire system of your game, and it's allowing you to design it. And then you might have very small, very purpose-built function tools that are like a noise generation script for just creating noise textures, or a debug function that debugs a specific thing or debugs a number of different things, but like very concretely only debug stuff, right? Or only surfaces logs and stuff like that. A question or an assumption people might have is that what with the industry being where it is and AAA being where it is, that perhaps the relevant tools needed to make games have already been made, right? Why do we need to make more tools? And well, there's many answers to that question. And while yes, a lot already exists out there, and they're really good tools that you can depend on and immediately bring to your projects, your mileage will vary, right? Not every tool is going to fit the workflow that you have. It's not going to mesh necessarily well with the workflow that you have. Or you might find that it helps get your prototype off the ground quickly, and then you want to do something specific that tool doesn't support. So then you need to ask yourself, well, do I continue doing what the constraints that this tool has given me, or do I face the challenge of changing my workflow and replacing the tool? I would suggest, whenever you're in doubt, to opt for open source tools, right? Open source, for those of you who might not know, is pieces of code that exist in such a way that people can contribute to them freely and help that software grow and become more robust, right? Something akin to Microsoft Word, which is owned, published, and maintained by Microsoft, is closed source. Us mere mortals can contribute to the code of Microsoft Word without necessarily working for Microsoft. But there are many options in the web, GitHub and other repository libraries, of tools that you can contribute to. And you can use those tools. Usually they are cheaper, but not all of them are free. And the thing to remember is the way you use a tool is probably going to push that tool into a very unique set of circumstances, right? Your project is your project. It's supposed to be different from every single other project that has existed, even if it's in some minor way. And anyone who's developed software, even for a relatively limited amount of time, will tell you that whenever you try using software in ways it hasn't been used before, it's likely going to break. So you can help this software improve by recognizing where it breaks for your project, fixing it, and then saying, hey guys, I fixed the thing, and here's my fix. I recognize this issue, and here's my fix. Right? Or asking people to fix it for you. So yeah, open source, hell yeah, open source. Very much go open source. So why make tools though? Why even approach this task, this odyssey of building tools? What's even the point, right? Well, for one, it's really cool. And I'm not just saying that minimalistically or dismissively, but rather it as a developer, it will make you face very new and very complex problems, right? You're not just making things for your game, you're making things to make things for your game. You're having to abstract layers away and create solutions that might have to integrate with the OS, that might require an extension to your editor. And those are, again, very cool and complex problems. This can help put stuff that's very useful on your portfolio, and then you can also use those tools that you've made and those extensions that you've built as flex points. You can say, I built this, I made this, and it does this, and then you can flex and say that's really cool. So yeah, I think the biggest point is just a worthwhile endeavor. In addition to that, I mentioned this in the pre-made tools. Pre-made might just not work for you, right? If your tool depends, if you're using a tool that someone else made, then that introduces dependencies. And if that tool itself depends on some other pieces of software that are, being maintained by people who you have no visibility to, that can create cascading failures or dependency issues. It can introduce vulnerabilities into your system as well. Pre-made might also introduce workflow issues. You're having to adapt yourself to the tool rather than developing a tool that works for you. And it can restrict the way you grow, restrict the way you onboard people to your project. So, while some tools have enough traction that onboarding might not necessarily be the case, the more niche your tool is, the more you're going to run into that problem. Now, every tool is not necessarily free. So building pre-made is going to have you looking at cost and revenue considerations. What if the tool is free, but it asks that upon release, you have to give them 1% of your margin? It's certainly within their license to ask you for that. I think Unity or Unreal asks for that after a particular amount of money has been made using the engine. And it can also lead to licensing restrictions, right? Because you're using the tool as part of your development process, if for whatever reason the tool gets bundled into your finished product, it might lead to legal or licensing repercussions with whichever pre-made tool you're already using. And for all of those reasons, maybe pre-made might not work for you. So you need to analyze that, and you might need to make your own tools. Another upside of making your own tools is that usually when you make once, you can reuse forever, right? Yeah, sure, your tool will probably have to go through versions and change and adapt for its particular project. But once you solve a problem, then forever you have a solved problem. It's a little bit tautological, but it's one of the things that you should keep as a developer if your job allows you. Sometimes if you're working for a company, whatever solutions you make belong to the company. But if you're working as an indie developer, stuff that's in your toolkit is now in your toolkit. You can take it in whatever project you go. So facing and preemptively trying to solve problems with tools is a good idea so that you can more readily contribute to teams as soon as you join them. Pictured here are some very old games, but it's specifically what I'm suggesting, which was you have Parasite Eve, which introduced this like spherical targeting system, which probably started as some kind of tool or a collision detection tool, which then eventually got refined into Vagrant Story, and it's a spherical targeting tool. So just having that allowed Square Enix to make two different games, and it's important to recognize the value of what assembled toolkits can do for you. Also, if you make tools, your team will thank you. They will be very appreciative of how cool and loving that you are, and will never ever give you a hard time or press you for updates to your tool, as the screenshot shown here shows. And in general, easing production and reducing workloads is going to be appreciated by every part of your team, right? It means people are freer to help with other parts and to keep advancing stuff. And you should, whenever possible, use your tools to facilitate work, right? Not just allow work to happen, but facilitate it, make it easier, remove friction and remove obstacles. And doing that will foster a community of collaboration and care within your studio, which is usually very candid. And in the screenshot specifically, I'm showing an excerpt from the Discord, of the Comic Calamity Discord, where our tools developer added a debug menu that allowed us to do a bunch of stuff in-game, which could be accessed even in-build, and it was very powerful. And it became that all of the functionality became so necessary and so useful to us that whenever one of these menus was not working, I said coming soon, it actually, incensed us a little bit, because their work proved to be very, very valuable. And it's a bit of a humorous nod to Mr. Rashnis, who sits in chat. Also, you can sell tools that you make. You can license your own tools. If I'm talking here how pre-made might not work for you, if you make something and it works for you, it's likely gonna work for someone else. So, there's no reason, there's nothing stopping you from charging those other people, from telling those other people, like, hey, pay me a little bit, and that can help set you up for future development. It can help you. You can help your studio get a little bit more income, so that meeting deadlines and powering through work is doable for you guys. Do I care about tool stuff at all, or like how in depth can it necessarily be? Well, it is a discipline that needs to be attacked as a discipline in and of itself. It has efficiencies and considerations that you need to certainly address, right? During any point of development, two questions are very likely to arise, which are the ones shown on screen. Is this way of doing things good enough, or is there another way, a better way, right? And that can be without the tools, and that's a question that leads you to develop the tools. Or you might be using a particular tool and say, damn, this tool still sucks, and we might need to abandon it, or we might need to get a new one, right? By the same token, if you're going to undertake a tool's development effort, you have to evaluate how much time you're going to put in and how much time it's going to save. If your tool is not actually saving time, it's not actually allowing people to do things, then it might be dead in the water, and it will not be a good use of your time. It's also important to mention that a bunch of tools are not a game, despite what Silson wants to tell us, but it is rare that a game gets made with no tools. Those are usually going to stay behind the scenes, though, and they're mostly going to help the development process. So keep in mind that whatever efforts you put into developing tools is going to be usually very, very opaque to the player, unless you're releasing your tools as part of your release game. So something like a level editor, a quest editor, a modding engine. That stuff can be very, very useful and can help build communities. And those usually stem from tools you've built as you develop your game. But yeah, it's important to remember that tools should work in service of the development process and in service of design. Also, beware of Maslow's hammer, right? If you're working with a few sets of tools or tools that you've built yourself, and it's very tempting to try to use that tool for every possible use case and say like, oh, we could use we could use the ability editor to also fix or to also handle dialogue. And if you do that, you're gonna start corrupting what the original tool was. And sure, it might grow, it might develop new features, but it can also break. And it can also become an unwieldy mess or an unmaintainable mess, which is something you need to remember. Right? Also, as you develop tools, keep in mind that you have to address root causes. Right? You can for sure build tools that address specific issues, especially if they're smaller tools. But if you keep going for low-hanging fruit to optimize, you might be developing a bunch of time, or you might be dedicating a bunch of time into solving problems that you could have dedicated that time or less into solving one root cause that is causing everything else, right? And that is more or less why you should treat tools dev as part of your general engineering, or care as much as you would any other part of engineering. It has to be attacked, and it has to be approached with a level of planning and a level of care, and very objectively and very meticulously, to ensure that time dedicated to it doesn't impact production in other ways. So, speaking of production, how does tool involve the process? Where usually there are points where you're gonna be thinking about tools, right? If we divide the game development process into ideation, pre-production, production, post-production, there are going to be times where making tools is going to be much more valuable than others, right? Early in ideation, if you start thinking I'm going to start building all of these tools, you might be jumping the gun. Because if you start making a tool for a particular ability system, for instance, and halfway through ideation, your game pivots and you no longer need that ability system, or that ability system has changed drastically, and you just spent a bunch of time building a tool that's never going to work, right? Normally, you should really start honing into tools development once some of those ideas begin to crystallize, so late into ideation, early into pre-production, because as those tools become realities and the workflows become established, you can use the new times to figure out, okay, if it takes with these tools so long to make, I don't know, these amount of levels or these amount of abilities or this amount of dialogue trees or whatever content that you need, you can then scale that to understand how long production is going to take, right? And using those estimates, you might analyze, oh, we need to optimize further, or the project is not viable, or now it is, right? Even into production, you might want to continue building tools, as speeding up production means that budgets decrease, right? Or at least you don't spend as much. And it means also there's more time for QA and fixing bugs. But usually once production is wrapping up and you're releasing, or even after release, you're going to be a lot less focused on building tools, but not completely without it, right? You might still want to build tools to track how your game is performing through telemetry, or build bug reporting tools for your users once they start playing. And those are still tools you need to consider. So I guess it's important to be explicit and intentional, right? Whenever you're going to start building a tool, like, make sure of what you're trying to build and evaluate that time very clearly, so that you can surface and talk to your team, like, I can build this tool, it's going to take me this amount of time. And it's going to take an amount of time that, if you're juggling the gameplay developer and the tools they've had, you're going to have to say, it's time I can't dedicate to gameplay development because I'm dedicating it on building a tool, right? That can help your producer understand how to shuffle workload going forward. And it also helps you understand, as things move and processes change, when an idea might be worth abandoning, right? The phrase in game development that always keeps cropping up is kill your darlings. Tools dev is not immune to that, and it's not immune to that line of thinking, right? At some point, there's if you keep working or keep investing into a tool, you are contributing to the sunk cost fallacy, where you're saying, like, no, I need to continue working on this because we've already invested so much time into it. And sometimes it might be worth cutting early and developing a new tool, or looking at how the process needs to change. That leads into the fact that tools suffer scope creep, right? Tools grow. As I said, they evolve and change over time. And if you need to treat them as projects, and if you're not careful, any project suffers from scope creep, right? You can continue, we're going to add a new and refurbished UI because the UI is not as easy to use as it could be. Or it should also cover, this tool should also cover this, and this domain, because they, quote unquote, fall under the same domain problem or whatever, right? It's very easy to grow, especially as you become engaged with what you're doing and you're satisfied and happy with it. And don't, because or be very wary of it, because it means unattending other priorities, and it can end up impacting delivery time for the rest of your team. All right, so that is very high level what tools dev is and why you should care about it. So I'm very quickly going to talk a little bit about how do you approach tools dev and how do you get your start with it, right? As a software developer, or even if you're a designer who's looking to get into this, right? I guess the first part is do design. Treat your tool as a design project. So you have to design what's your tool trying to solve, right? As I said, there are many things you can build tools for. So figure out what it is you're trying to achieve. And it doesn't have to be one of these categories. It can be intersections of them, right? You might want to expand designer powers. By that, I mean, allow your designers to, within the engine, be able to edit a dialogue tree, or give them a behavior tree editor, which might not be part of the engine. But you might also want to do that through surfacing play analytics to your designers so that they know how to tune, right? So the first step is figuring out what you're trying to do so that your tool works. and then decide where your tool needs to live, right? What do I mean by that? Some tools are good in your, like, randomly in your computer or on some repository that you run or you execute alongside your game editor, right? So if you have a script that creates noise textures, for instance, that you can then import the finished textures into your game, that script can live externally, no problem. If you have a tool that allows you to quickly parse through an Excel spreadsheet of weapon stats so you can balance them or figure out which weapons are unbalanced, that can live externally because the files it works on live externally, right? When I mean in editor, I actually now mean editor extensions and other tools that allow you to, within editor, without having to change the context of the program you're working on, building tools within that. So Unreal has a bunch of different tools. It has the code editor, it has the animation editor, it has the level editor, and those are all tools that live within the editor. Unity has the inspectors, it has the hierarchy, it has the animation tree editor, the animation editor itself. But if you use, like, for instance, something that Unity doesn't have is a dialogue editor. And there's a bunch of pre-made tools that extend Unity to do that. Or you can build your own, and you can make a window within Unity that allows you to edit your dialogue and save it to a scriptable object or a DAC file or whatever it is you're using, right? And then there are tools that exist within the game. And by that, I mean usually something that developers know how to access through hidden commands. So if you've ever opened a command line within a game, like in Minecraft, I think there's a command line. I know in Left 4 Dead, there's a command line. I think Doom had command lines. You usually, like, input some commands and it opens up a bunch of tools that you can use to change things in game. That's very useful when you're testing for stuff in your build. Because once it's out of your editor and in the finished software, you're not going to get those helpful debug logs, or it's much harder to get those helpful debug logs. You're going to have to use in-game tools to fix that. Right? So now going, like, category by category, if you're going to develop external tools, there's some stuff you need to consider, right? Do you need a whole app, or can it just be a script? If you're looking to learn a language that can do both, or you're looking to learn a programming language to help with this, I recommend Python, because Python can build desktop apps very, very cleanly using tkinter with some extra libraries. And if you're comfortable with C#, then there's Windows Presentation Forms, I think it's called, WPF, which is an OS-powered tools builder, so that you can make graphical, GUIs, graphical user interfaces. If you're just building a script, then yeah, Python is your best friend. You can make small, very purpose-built scripts to, like, solve whatever you might need. And Python's very good at working with matrices and images. So, shout out to Python. You do need to consider, because you're working on an external tool, how you're going to get data to and from your tool, like from your tool to the game and from the game to your tool, right? If you're using the editor as the bridge, then yeah, if your tool actually mounts on a running version of your game because it, like, listens to the process on your OS, like, how you do it, it's going to be up to you. But it is something that you're going to have to, like, come across. Otherwise, you have a tool that does not talk with your game at all, and then it's no longer a tool for your game, or it's going to be very hard to, like, get stuff from one place to B, which reduces usability. And finally, how are users going to access your tool, right? If it's living externally, do I have to install prerequisites? Do I have to npm install a bunch of scripts through Node? Do I have to install Python and then download a bunch of stuff? Or are you giving me a simple executable I can just run, right? Like, think as much as you can about your users, especially during an external tool. because your users might not really want to work with external tools. They might just want to work everything in editor. If you're making editor tools, keep in mind that most parts of a conversion engine can be extended. Unreal supports extension, Unity supports extension, Godot supports extension. Those are the engines that I know of. I'm sure if there are others that they also support extension to a degree. You can build whole new functionality inside of them. I know Freya Holmer, who is a very renowned graphics programmer and shader dev, built a 3D modeler within Unity. Like straight up within Unity, recreated the functionality for something like Blender, and she calls it half edge. So you can build as complicated as you want to go. You can probably support it, right? Engine documentation will usually be your best friend, but in the image below, which is a quest system editor that I built within Unity, this was built using the node graph tool, which is a piece of UI that Unity supports and provides. However, the documentation for it is really bad. Like they only tell you what classes exist and what functions they have, but not what they do. And for that, I would say, for those more esoteric cases, maybe look up tutorials, go read a little bit in the internet. But knowing that this stuff exists, I got to it because I was reading on the Unity's UI builder documentation that this existed, right? And the Unity's documentation got me there. So I guess get used to reading some documentation if you're going to be building tools. It's kind of par for the course. Also, document your work, because others are going to wrestle with your tool once you're done with it, right? You're going to deliver your tool, you might not be working on a project anymore, and some other poor soul is going to have to read through your jumble of code that you like strap together to make something that kind of works. So document it. Be nice. Be helpful. It can also, like, doing the process of documentation itself is kind of like rubber ducky debugging, which is a process by which you find errors and flaws with your code by talking to someone else about it and walking them through how it explains. Walking them through explaining how it works, And doing the documentation can help you highlight those opportunities for improvement. And documentation means you're going to be taking plenty of pictures. It's going to be taking annotated pictures, ideally. And you know what really likes documented pictures of your work? Your portfolio. So documenting your work is a great way of beefing up your portfolio. Now, you might run into the case where you made a sweet tool that does some sweet things and nobody's using it. And that's going to be very frustrating, and it's going to happen. So you need to ask yourself why. Well, first of all, your tools need to be useful, right? If you're giving tools to your designers, right? Don't ask them to go into the code. Like don't have your tool have them go into the code for whatever it is they need to do, because that slows down their process usually. You have to be able to give them the ability to iterate as quickly as possible, right? So in that sense, tools should allow your team to do whatever it is that they want to do as efficiently and cleanly as it can, and to actually do the thing, to solve the problem. As I said, tools facilitate. And doing that is something you need to keep first and foremost as you're building it. And it should also help the different people on your team understand the relationships between the different assets that go into your game and how they relate to gameplay, right? Because games are just a bunch of data and classes. And sure, a lot of art as well. But those like assets need to be arranged in ways that make sense from a programming standpoint, from a gameplay standpoint, and for a designer, that workflow might not always be like super clear. For a producer, that might not always be super clear. Or for an artist who needs to add art to your game, that might not be super clear. So making that process clear for them allows them to create faster for the game. Your tools also need to be intuitive. right? The previous tool that was showing this one, it's a tool I made for creating edit abilities that works by stacking these orders like concentrically, right? So the outermost shell is the last command that's going to be executed. And that's not necessarily intuitive. A lot of people don't think in stacks unless you're a Magic the Gathering player. So, as you're building your tool, read on UI, read on UX, like use this opportunity to brush up on UI and UX skills, because people are like, if you want people to use the thing you've built, it needs to feel good. It needs to be intuitive, and it needs to make sense when you're like doing things, why things are happening, or if you need to fix something, where you fix something, right? And by that I mean, if a designer creates an ability and the ability doesn't work as intended, they might, if they don't understand how they've arranged stuff in your tool, they're going to blame your tool. They're not going to blame their process, right? But if their process makes it easy, if the tool makes it easy for them to realize where the weird behavior is happening, then that's going to be easier for them to fix. Your tools also need to be accessible, right? It kind of goes in hand with a manual thing, with the documentation thing, but like make manuals, right? If you make a tool and nothing explains how to be used, people are not going to use it. People are going to hate it. So make manuals accessible, make them very detailed, make them very thorough. Talk to the people using your tool, ask them, like look at them use it as much as possible, so that you can see where there's friction, where there's bounce off points, or where they're having difficulty, so that you can A, address it, or B, put it in a manual so that people know, like, hey, when you if you run into this problem, this is how you fix it, right? Nothing beats a good manual. So having said all that, that's all being very abstract. I am now going to talk a little bit about bad bots. And there's two people from the bad bots team, myself included. Three people, myself included, in this presentation. I have not cleared talking about bad bots with them, but I'm sure they're cool with it. I will get an earful if I don't, but I'm sure they're cool with it. So what is bad bots? Bad bots is a retro arcade shooter. Right, it's very much in the style of, oh, come on, you should be playing constantly. Can I loop? I can't. Anyways, it's a retro arcade shooter where you shoot a bunch of bats. There's power-ups and power-downs, there's single-player, multiplayer, and there's plenty of bats, right? And there's a lot going on the screen, and there's a lot going on in the game. So as we developed it, there were a lot of problems that arose throughout this development that require having a tools-minded approach to them. So which problems were they? Well, for one, our bats really like clumping together, right? And that's not conducive to good gameplay where you're trying to shoot and aim at a bunch of bats, because if they're all clumped together in the middle, and you just move your cursor to the center and just hold the fire button. And that's not exactly super huge, super riveting gameplay, but it's that needed fixing. Performance every now and again tanked occasionally, especially as we were developing the cooperative mode, and we needed to see why. There was a lot of content that needed testing. We had power-ups, we had power-downs, we have different types of bats, and being able to test that content and do the QA and make sure that things are interacting with each other in reasonable, sensible ways, and also being able to replicate bugs that we found was very important. And we also needed to get data from remote playtesters, because as we were preparing for launch, we were doing so when it was summer in Rochester, and there wasn't a lot of people around to playtest our games. So we tried sending playtest copies and versions of our game to people who might be remote, or send them over the internet. And we still needed to get that data. And relying on them to send us the data wasn't exactly gonna work. So first, solving performance stacking. We didn't need to make custom tools for this one. We relied on existing ones. Specifically, we relied on Unity's memory profiler, which helped us figure out where the performance was stacking. And it turned out to be within the movement algorithms for our bats. There was a lot there was if I remember correctly, many ON squared algorithms happening. So figuring out ways of addressing those or breaking those up helped us ensure that we were at a consistent 60 frames per second. Because what usually would happen is you would have a major dip at the start of every round, which felt very bad. So with the profiler, we figured out what the functions that needed optimizing were, which also allows us to drill down to find out which functions being called within that function were the ones that are being heavy. And from that, it was just a matter of optimizing, which it's beyond the scope of this talk. Then for solving the clumping, it was difficult because a lot of these like movement algorithms, like I said, if you try to debug them through debug log, it's just going to give you vectors and numbers, and knowing which bat is moving in which vector visually is a nightmare. It's not viable. So for that, we again didn't have to create custom tools. Instead, we relied on the debug functionality that exists within Unity to build debug visualizations that allowed us to understand what forces were acting on our different bats, why they were moving the way they were moving, and what parameters we needed to tune so that stopped happening. We didn't have those huge clumps of bats. For testing content, we did create an in-game tool called it Looking Glass, which allowed us to, once we were in-game through a series of secret handshakes that you need to do in the pause menu, it spawned this little sub-menu on the bottom right of the screen that allowed you to toggle the spawning of the different types of bats or forcefully spawn some of them. Same for like power-ups and power-downs. You could toggle their availability in general or force their spawn so you could test them. And then you could debug some other stuff. We debugged our achievements. We locked the frame rate to make sure that our input was properly working. There was a bunch of stuff we tried testing. And if you'd like to know, in old games, and by old I mean when I was a kid, because damn, cheats, the way you press enter and press a code that would make certain stuff happen in the game, those were debugging tools. Those were in-game debugging tools. So developers could quickly warp to a level and analyze it, or give yourself invisibility so you can stand in front of an enemy and watch it, behave in a particular way, or give yourself invisibility so you could see the behavior pattern of an enemy if the player is not around. So all of that stuff, then once it was released, it was repackaged and repurposed as a cheat. But it's these in-game debug tools are usually what cheats were. And finally, for getting out play data, this required building it required building a set of external tools, not just one, but they connected to our editor, or specifically they connected to our game client, so that the release build, right? And we built a bunch of stuff in Amazon that as games were being played, the game sent a JSON file saying oh, this is what happened, in this play session. This is the game, this is the game mode that was played. This is how many bats were killed. This is how many shots were fired. All the different types of bats that were killed. The stun is by type, and the power-ups obtained is also by type. And that gave us a bunch of information on how to balance the game. Because as we were developing achievements, we needed to know how many points were people getting, how long it took them to get those points, so that we can say, oh, we want to make sure people play the game for X amount of time, right? So before they unlock all these achievements. So yeah, getting the play data or building this pipeline, this data pipeline, I guess you could consider it a tool, because it then allowed us to build reports, which were 100% a tool that we used to visualize this data. So yeah. That's my talk, and questions are welcome.